So are you someone that's currently struggling with getting your humidity levels for your reptile just right? Well, in today's video, what I'm going to be going over is helpful tips for you guys to get your humidity levels where they need to be and make your reptile very happy. Stick around. My name is Nick Pulaski. Growing up, I have always had a passion for wildlife, and with that passion, along with my passion of filmmaking, I get taken on some amazing adventures creating wildlife content, getting up close with a variety of incredible animals. So come follow along as I pursue my goals of educating, inspiring, exploring, and conserving wildlife, all while having fun, seeing the beauty in our natural world. What is going on, everybody? So today what we're going to be discussing is humidity levels. What is humidity? Why do we need to care about it? Why is it so frustrating to keep it just right for our reptiles? And why don't our reptiles have perfect sheds without it? So that's what we're going to be discussing. It is definitely a frustrating thing to do, that's for sure. I mean, I live in the Midwest here in the United States, and because we get into winter months like we are right now and experiencing, it can sometimes be a struggle for us and not give us perfect sheds like this one right here. Thankfully, I am still getting perfect sheds throughout. Sometimes we do have some that occasionally will have bad sheds, and that's just a common thing. Don't worry about it if that happens every now and then. It's just when it's a consistent pattern, that's when you need to be worrying about it, that's for sure. But if it's just an every now and then kind of thing, it's just something that you really just want to give your reptile a quick soak every now and then, monitor them, make sure that they're doing okay, and then just kind of help them get that off, or they'll get that off themselves. So just kind of keeping those kind of practices in mind, that's definitely what I would recommend. But we're going to be going over today what to do to help with humidity as a whole for your reptile. First off, what is humidity? Why do we need to care about it for our reptile or whatever we're keeping? So basically, humidity is basically the level of water in the air. So we basically are trying to track the level of water moisture in the air, so the percentage of that. So if we have a more tropical species, this is where it more so comes into play, and it matters most that we make sure this humidity level is higher versus something that's more of a desert species that would require a lower humidity level. Generally, that's how it works. We're just monitoring the concentration of water vapor in the air in a percentage form. So that's basically what we're going to be doing, and that's how we gauge these things in terms of humidity level for our reptiles. Some reptiles require like a 50 to 60%, some require like a 60 to 70%, and so on and so forth. So it's not going to be an exact number. It's okay if it fluctuates. You just want to have it in a general zone of where that needs to be. Nature isn't perfect. The habitats we provide are not going to be perfect as well too. So it doesn't have to be exact. If it's a couple points lower than it needs to be or a couple points higher, that's okay. It's when there are these huge fluctuation differences of where that zone needs to be. If it's too high or too low, that's when you need to be monitoring these things, and that's when this video should be concerning you. If it's just a couple points off, don't worry about it. But this is also just really good tips to keep in mind, so definitely stay tuned. Basically, you might be asking right off the bat, okay, Nick, how are we going to be gauging the humidity levels with our reptiles? So the easiest way to do this is with a humidity gauge. Kind of common sense, right? So a humidity gauge or a hygrometer is what they call them. You basically can get these anywhere. You can get them at a pet store, you can get them at Amazon, you can get these things really anywhere. And they're just simple little devices that track the humidity levels in whatever area that you put them in whatever zone you put them in. So within your habitat, you just kind of put them in like a mid-tier level or even a lower level and a mid-tier level. That would be perfect, and that will help you determine where your humidity levels are at. So definitely check in looking into those. That's a great investment, is a hygrometer or a humidity gauge. So definitely look into those, because that's how you will track the percentages and see what zone and percentage you are currently at. Tip number one, misting it manually. So this is my mist bottle right here that I use, and you can literally get these anywhere. Any kind of spray bottle will do, as long as it's a brand new spray bottle that has not had any other chemicals in it beforehand. That's what I recommend. You can get these cheap for like $1. And the main reason that I manually mist my reptiles and don't have them on a mist system per se is I want to interact with my animals. I want to check in on my animals. So if I'm doing this, that is a great way to stay engaged with your animals. So this is a great way to stay in tune with your animal, make sure that they're still alert, happy, and healthy. This is a great way to do it, by misting the animals. Definitely a simple and easy way to interact with your animals. And like I said, we're going to discuss this a little bit further later, but misting an animal versus a fogger, if you mist an animal, it's another great way for the animal to stay hydrated, because then they have water droplets on like their decor and their plants that they will actually lick. Besides having a water bowl, you should always have water available for your animal to stay hydrated no matter what it is, whether it's a tropical or a desert species. Fresh, clean water is always something that should be available. Regardless, this is a great way to do this as well too, is by giving them a spray down in the morning and at night. That's normally when I do it. A nice light spray during the morning, so I'm mimicking morning dew, and then at night as well, so I can raise those humidity levels up right before the lights turn off. That's a great way as well too. So great way for them to stay hydrated with a misting system or manually misting them as well as it's great to actually check in on your animals. So definitely recommend it. So the next tip I'm going to go over is having a humid hide. Super simple thing. Pet stores don't make these. It's a fun project to make yourself. So basically what I do is if you have like say a cave or some sort of, basically it could be whatever your reptile essentially hides in. It could be even like a cork round or anything like that. Insulate that with like say sphagnum moss. If you just put sphagnum moss and kind of trinkle it around or put it on the bottom, that is a great way to insulate it, as well as it's a great way if you keep it moist in there. And then occasionally if you just spray down that sphagnum moss, that is a great way to have a nice humid hide for your reptile. You don't want it extremely damp. You just want a nice spray down on there. You want it to have the ability to dry out before you respray it down. That is a great way to have a nice humid hide for your reptile. So your reptile feels secure, along with it has that humidity level where it needs to be. But you also want to obviously raise the humidity levels in general in the whole enclosure to where they need to be. That is a top way to make sure that your animal doesn't have issues shedding, because they normally will go in there and then by the time they get out, I mean, normally I've never seen an issue with an animal shedding in there. It works great for leopard geckos. Normally I give them a nice dry hide as well as a nice humid hide. Works great for certain colubrid snakes as well too, say your corn snakes, king snakes, anything. If you give them a nice mossy hide, it's perfect. It works for ball pythons, works for anything. So definitely consider that for one of your animals as well too. So definitely consider that for one of your reptiles that would require it. Definitely works. So the next tip I want to go over is about bedding for your reptile, and it is the foundation for the habitat and the enclosure for your reptile, that's for sure. And bedding is an important tool for maintaining humidity levels depending on what you use. Let's say for example like an aspen bedding. If you use an aspen bedding, it's going to be a drier bedding, not going to hold humidity very well. But if you use something say like a cocoa husk kind of bedding, the ones that you see in like pet stores or at reptile shows that come in like a block, some brands are like Reptichip, which is not a sponsor, but Reptichip kind of blocks for example, or for say like if you use like what I exactly use is cypress mulch. I use unfertilized, untouched 100% cypress mulch. If you get that stuff in bulk and then you use that, that is a great way to retain and hold moisture. You can mix it up with sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is always going to be your friend when retaining moisture and humidity levels. So if you use that and you kind of mix those kind of things up, and you can do this and just kind of make your own substrate with these kind of things, these are great ways to make sure that you're maintaining those humidity levels as a whole, is using a great substrate at the beginning. So that's a proper way to do it. And like I said, this is great for tropical species, that's for sure. So this kind of bedding retains moisture very, very well. So definitely look into these types of beddings. And some people will actually do their own thing with like bioactive setups as well too, and they will actually make their own bedding by mixing like say cypress mulch with sphagnum moss as well as some sort of unfertilized topsoil. They'll mix that all together and get this nice bedding that's a variety mix, and it really adds a lot of depth and substrate levels, and it's really cool. So definitely look into those things as well. It retains moisture very well. So it all depends on whatever kind of reptile you have too. So see what works best, but there are some options out there and there's plenty of different options that work well. Like I said, there are species out there that would thrive in a bioactive setup, and what basically a bioactive setup will do is it actually is layered. So you have your nice retaining moisture layer on top, but if it gets too damp and it gets oversaturated, basically what you have underneath that is a nice layer in between of film, which is basically just some sort of like screening where the water can actually drip through, and then you have like a rock layer or like a clay pebble marble layer down below. So basically what that will essentially do is that is where the moisture goes and drips down, and it will essentially dry and air out itself if you give it the ability to. So that is another great way to do those kind of things. Definitely look into that for your animal and see if a bioactive setup is proper for it. It works great for chameleons, it works great for geckos, certain species of snakes, lizards, tortoises. I mean, a lot of them sometimes will tear it up, but I mean, it still works. At the end of the day, a lot of reptiles can thrive in a bioactive setup. So you just have to see if it works best for your species in general. Definitely look into it. It's a great thing to research and try. I highly recommend it. All right, so the next tip is foggers. So foggers are a fantastic way to help maintain humidity levels. Mine kick on personally. I do a DIY one. I will definitely leave a link above so you guys can check that out. So my foggers, they're set up on timers actually. They go hand in hand, and that is a crucial thing I highly recommend. recommend doing, so it's not a manual process that way. But basically they kick on twice a day, and they will kick on, and depending on the time of day, they kick on for either 15 minutes or 30 minutes at a time. They'll run their course and then they kick off. So I do that twice a day. They have those things running and they work well. I mean, they maintain the humidity levels where they need to be. The animals love them, and it's a great way to boost the humidity levels as a whole. It's awesome. I love foggers. So I don't want you guys to get confused with a fog system versus a mist system. A fog system will create and raise the humidity levels, but it's not a great source if you're wanting to hydrate your animal. They cannot get hydrated from a fog. So that's where a mist system will come in. If you have a mist system that kicks on, that is a great way to hydrate your animal. Some people, I highly recommend having both kind of systems, and you want to have both systems and you want to have them ratio out so they're not overdoing it in your system. So say for example, if you have a fog system that kicks on during the day and then a mist system that maybe kicks on at night, or just kind of have a nice ratio and kind of determine it from there. I mean, there's a lot of varieties. You know what's best for you, and there's varieties to it. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to it. You just have to figure out what works best for you so you're not oversaturating it or overdoing it. You want to make sure that you're getting it just right to the points that it needs to be. And just keep in mind, for mist systems and for foggers, timers go hand in hand with them. So you can't have one without the other. It's definitely a necessity. So another great way to boost humidity levels is actually adding live plants and establishing them in your system. So you can't just expect throwing a plant in there and then your humidity levels are going to be great. That's not how that works. So you have to establish the plant in the actual habitat. So you have to be making sure you're taking care of that plant, and as you take care of that plant, as you water that plant, as you work with that plant, that's not only raising the humidity levels like that, but having the plants in there itself is also going to help with raising the humidity levels as well. So definitely research which plants are reptile safe for your specific reptile before you just start throwing random plants in there. You want to make sure also that they're not made with any fertilizers with them, no chemicals, no nothing. Make sure you get them from a reptile safe kind of source. But it's a great way because it's not only providing more humidity levels, it's going to look more natural, it's going to look really cool for you. Your animal is going to interact with it. It could use it as a hide, it could use it for food even. I mean, it's just a great thing. So you definitely want to look into stuff like that because it's overall a win-win for the animal, is maintaining it with some plants. Now we're talking a lot about getting the humidity levels where they need to be, but it can also just fall into what kind of enclosure you're using essentially. So if you're using like a screen top aquarium, it's not going to hold humidity as well as say like a PVC kind of enclosure. That's going to retain and hold the moisture pretty well as well too. But the other thing you want to keep in mind is aeration for your enclosure. You don't want it to be this enclosed box where there's not a lot of airflow. You definitely want some airflow in there because you want the substrate to dry out. You don't want this stuff to stay stagnant and wet because that's when bacteria can grow up and mold can grow as well too. So that's something you definitely want not to happen. So you definitely want the substrate to be drying out throughout the day, not staying like desert dry or anything like that. You want it to still maintain where it needs to be, but you definitely want it to air out, dry out, and before it goes through another mist cycle or fog cycle or misting down, whatever you use, you definitely want to make sure that you're maintaining it properly so you're not overdoing it or you're not underdoing it. We're going to be talking a little bit more about overdoing in a second here, but at the end of the day, it's all a cycle. So you want to make sure that you're giving it a nice morning dew per se, and then you're wanting that to dry out throughout the day while your lights are on, and then your humidity levels are still staying where they need to be. And then some people raise their humidity levels a little bit higher at night when it gets darker, so they'll do a nice little heavier misting during the night before it goes into nighttime, and then they kick off and then it dries out a little bit throughout the night. Not as much because your lights aren't going to be on, but then the cycle continues. So just kind of finding what works for you and you find your rhythm. That's how that goes. So there are things you want to avoid for when you're trying to set your reptiles' humidity levels to the just right parameters that they need to be. These are the two things that I say are the most common things that happen when you're trying to do your humidity levels right, and they actually go far wrong. So these two things are crucially things that you want to keep in mind and not do when you're trying to set the humidity levels. And here's the first one. So these things kind of go hand in hand, but they are very close in terminology, but they are also very different as well too. So this is why I'm going to go over them separately. The first thing is not overdoing it. So for example, with misting, you don't want to overdo it. So I'm saying like misting once in the morning and then misting maybe 3 more times throughout the day, and then misting again at night. You don't want to be doing that. If you're misting too much, that's going to cause problems. So you're not giving that habitat enough time to air out or dry out. So what that will do in return is that's going to harbor a lot of bacteria that you do not want, as well as it can cause illnesses for your reptile. So you don't want to be overdoing doing it, that's for sure. So only mist maybe once during the morning, and then maybe a little bit of a heavier mist at night. That's what I would recommend. Or maybe the fogger kicks on for like 15 minutes in the morning and then maybe 30 minutes at night. You know what I mean? There's certain things that you want to do, but you don't want to be spraying it in the morning 3 times during the day and then at night. I mean, that's not going to be beneficial whatsoever. So the second thing that you don't want to be doing when trying to raise the humidity levels is don't overuse. And what I'm literally talking about is not about the oftentimes that you missed. I'm talking about literally some people, and I've seen this, take the cap off and they just pour water into the enclosure. Not good. You do not want to oversaturate the enclosure with water. If you just make the enclosure a muddy, soupy mess, not going to be beneficial whatsoever. That bedding is going to be impossible to dry out. It's going to take weeks to dry out. Not a good way. It's not a fail-safe way to do that once a week and call it a day. Not a good way to do that whatsoever. The only way I've seen that actually work in the past, and very few people would be able to actually do this, is if they have a nice tropical outside enclosure. Some people will just pour and spray down in heavy loads and then just kind of leave it, and then it has the ability to air out because it's in the sun. If it's in direct sunlight like that, like it normally is in an outside enclosure, that's fine. But we're talking about like indoors like this. Don't be pouring water and oversaturating your bedding. Not a good way. You're going to be harboring a lot of bacteria immediately. You're going to be creating a lot of mold. It's going to be impossible to air that stuff out, and it's going to be causing a lot of illnesses and scale rotten issues for your reptile, and blistering. It's not a good thing. It's an ugly thing. So don't do that for your reptile. Don't oversaturate and don't overdo. Those are the top 2 things that you do not want to do to your reptile. Sometimes they can go hand in hand, but still, I mean, there's differences as well too. So that's why I separated them, if that makes sense now. At the end of the day, you're just trying to find the Goldilocks way, the in the middle way, to make sure that your parameters for your humidity levels are just right. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Let me know if you guys have any other tips down below. I would love to hear them as well too. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I hope this was a helpful video for you guys. If you guys could do me a couple favors, if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it, as well as hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Definitely check me out on my social media. I'm always updating you guys on my enclosures and my animals on there, so definitely stay tuned on there. Thank you guys again for watching. It truly means the world to me, and until next time, we will see you guys soon. Take care.